Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today we're going to talk about what to do on a road trip with your partner. The reason why this idea came up is because recently we've been talking about what to do when you're stuck in the house during COVID, during quarantine because of COVID, with your partner if you live with them. But now things in the world are getting a little wonky, people are getting crazy, and people are starting to travel. And for most of us, we'll travel by car just to kind of keep it safe and condensed. You know, you're in the same space with the people you've been in the same space with for, I don't know, the foreseeable future. But regardless, this came up because I have a wedding that I am going to be in, and I brought that up on the last episode I hosted. And it requires a road trip. So this road trip is going to happen with my partner, and I need to figure out what to do with him in the car, because when we're at the house, we are privileged enough to have the space to be apart from each other every once in a while. You know, we're in the same house, but we're not like all together all the time. And then when we are, we have, you know, I have books, he has video games, there's board games we play together. So we have physical activities that keep us engaged, and not, you know, just each other. So this presents a different kind of dilemma with my partner that we haven't really faced before, because we have been on a road trip together, but we haven't been on a road trip together after being with each other for 24/7. So it kind of just leaves us in this space that we're always in, except we're trapped even more. So I had to research, or wanted to research, how to, I don't know, deal with that. It's similar to COVID, except you don't have the resources that you would typically have at home, right? So I really wanted to figure out how to get through this road trip sane. We do have over 5 hours in a car together and less than 10. So it kind of makes it that weird space of time where you kind of just want to drive all the way through. You don't really take a break. So we have quite a few hours ahead of us where we're just us, and there are no distractions except for maybe I can be on my phone when I'm not driving, or vice versa. But there's only so many hours you want to spend and data you want to use. So the main focus of our episode is going to be how to do a road trip with your partner after COVID, or during COVID, I should say. So that's going to be our first segment, is the typical things you might do on a road trip, except they're specifically for couples together. And at the end of the episode, I'm going to give you guys other relationship podcasts you can listen to that will either increase the intimacy that you've created during this road trip, or just release some of the tension. Because while this podcast is really good for you to listen to and start off with and share with your partner, because duh, but no, really, this podcast is genuinely good. I've listened to other hosts and I really like it. But you have more than 1 hour to kill. What else are you going to do with it? So stay tuned for the other podcasts that I recommend, because they're really funny or they're really helpful. And regardless of whether or not you're on a road trip, I think you'll enjoy them. So stick around for that. Okay, so let's get started and talk about the different things you can do with your partner during a road trip. So according to happilyeveradventures.com, that's a really cute website name. I feel like I keep saying that, but I'm being pretty genuine in my assessment of that. I think it's super cute. According to happilyeveradventures.com, the first thing on the list for things couples can do is snack. I feel like every episode I'm talking about how much I love coffee or food, but I'm being very genuine. I love food. So when I saw this list and saw that it was first on the list, I'm like, hell yeah, that's exactly my kind of list. So they have snack on here, and their explanation is like, isn't the best part of any road trip snacks? And the answer is always yes. Snacks are always the right answer. It doesn't matter if you're on a road trip, let's be real. So, but it says a road trip for couples is no different. Like, give them snacks, and then you just have something to talk about. You have something to keep your hands busy. You have opinions on what your food is, right? So that's why it gives you something to talk about. But more than that is that they suggest with the snacks that you can play a game. And the game is Guess That Flavor. And I bet you can guess that game with the title of that one. So they just say they recommend bringing a bunch of different snacks, and then the driver has to guess what the snack is or what the flavor is. And so, they recommend a specific type of chip on here. They're just doing their advertisements, but I think anything with a funky flavor, especially I think Ruffles just came out with some sort of pickled flavor that my partner pointed out and said I would really love, except I don't know. I've never tried like pickled flavored anything other than a pickle. So I highly doubt that's true, but he's trying, and it's really cute, and it is a good suggestion for us to have because we want to try something new. So, and maybe during this road trip we will. And then I bet you pickle is not hard to figure out, but it would be really fun to watch me just like, oh my God, to die from like trying one of those chips. If I'm wrong, if you guys like pickled chips, like pickled flavored chips, let me know. I really do like pickles, so I'm always up for the suggestion. Our Instagram account is GSMC_relationship, and I would love to know what you guys are eating and snacking on because I love snacks. So any recommendations are good for me. All right. So the next thing on the list that they have is to listen to a podcast. Ooh. I already recommended that you listen to this podcast, but honestly, I think this is actually a really good endeavor to learn more about your partner, because when you're planning for a road trip, hopefully you're planning a little bit because you do get hungry and you have to do rest stops. And I'm not much of a planner, but I would hope that you pick out some music that you guys know that you like. And that would also include picking out a podcast, because I don't know about you guys, I genuinely do love music. I can listen to music for forever, but I can't listen to my partner's music for forever. So this kind of creates an interesting dynamic because you have to figure out what you both like. It's about compromise, right? So, yeah, I would listen to a podcast, and this would be a good time to figure out what podcast your partner may listen to, or should take recommendations from them and then try and listen to those podcasts as well. And again, I don't know about you guys, but my partner doesn't really like podcasts, so it really is a challenge to focus on that and see what he might like. One of the ones they recommend on the website is How I Built This, and I have listened to that one. It's not exactly my cup of tea, but I'm definitely sure that my partner would like it because he's an engineer. So that would make sense, right? But yeah, so I would consider that a really good challenge just at home while you're planning the road trip, just to kind of figure out, what does my partner like to listen to? What do I like to listen to? And that works for music as well as podcasts. So yeah, I just think that's a really good suggestion. Okay, so the next one on the list is to listen to an audiobook on a longer road trip. So this suggestion is much like the first one. You kind of have to figure out, what your partner likes, if they even like books. But to be honest with you, like I've said before, I've mentioned this in a previous podcast, I used to be a librarian. And just because someone's not a reader doesn't mean they won't actually listen to an audiobook. Maybe they grew up listening to NPR. Maybe they grew up listening to audiobooks with their family. So it might be something that they're familiar with, even if they don't like reading. So I would give it a chance. And it really, really depends on the narrator. There's really good narrators out there. They get awards for it. So if you are interested in maybe getting a book and worried if your partner might not like it, check out the narrator, see if they're comfortable with it, and if not, there's tons of thousands of other options out there. So you can definitely find something out there for both of you, or at least, maybe you can listen to a little bit of a book you like and then listen to a little bit of a book they might like. Also, there's stuff other than fiction. I think people forget about that. Narrators narrate everything from celebrities doing their own memoirs to nonfiction books that are just narrated by a good narrator. And those can actually be really interesting too. It's similar to, you guys know Modern Love? It is a podcast now. It started out as just essays that were in the New York Times, and it became a show on Amazon. And interestingly enough, there's an article from there that will come up later in this podcast, but I digress. Modern Love. It started out as just essays in the New York Times, and they're real stories by real people, and then they turned it into a podcast by having someone narrate those stories. So what I'm saying is that audiobooks, there's a lot of options out there for the types of listening that you're going to do, and I think it's worth checking out a couple different people, especially if you haven't listened to an audiobook before. They're a lot different than they used to be. They're no longer just on tapes or CDs. They're just as easy to access as podcasts are, so I highly recommend just giving a couple a try. You can sample them even. Oh, and Amazon has that really cool feature. If you have the Kindle app, it'll actually give you the narration for I think like $2 or $3 more. You can get the narrative form of that book that you already bought from Amazon. And it's definitely worth a try. I mean, if you guys are bored and you need something to entertain you, just do a little research, ask a couple questions, and then maybe you guys have a couple of hours to kill that you no longer are worried about. Okay, so then their fourth recommendation on Happily Ever Adventures, again, really cute website name, is to play road trip games for couples. Now, I thought that was really interesting because I'm like, what are games on road trips that are specific to couples? I mean, it's kind of what I was looking for, so it's good that it answers this question, right? But yeah, so I was really interested to read that part of the article, so here we go. The first game they had was Guess That Flavor, and obviously I already talked about that. You just have a snack, and you have to guess the flavor of that snack. Now, a little treat for that, just to go back a little bit, is maybe switch it up with like a pretzel or something, and then they're just going to be like, salt? What did you give me, salt? And so I don't know. I'm a dork, so that's something that I would do. So yeah, that's the first game they mention. The second game is a license plate game, and they say that it's a classic, but it's a classic for a reason. And I don't know this game. I don't think I've played it before, but they said the first person to seek an out-of-state license plate calls out the name of the state and lightly punches the other. So because this is for a couple, they say replace the punch with something like a kiss or caress, but whatever floats your boat. Like I say, your mileage may vary. So there you go. That's a way to turn a classic game into something coupley, I guess. The other games that they recommend are pick up a hitchhiker. Now, when I first saw the title for that, I was like, how incredibly dangerous, coronavirus. My brain was all like serious, taking notes on what these different games were. And then I immediately was like, I'm a dork. So apparently this game, if you played it before, you just pretend you pick up a hitchhiker, and then the passenger makes up a story about who that hitchhiker is and where they're going. And they say that over time, the conversation can get flirty and you can take it from there. Perhaps that's the direction it can go. Also, it's suggested that, like, if you don't want to pretend that it's just a stranger, you can pretend you've just met and that this is a weird but awesome first date. So they said to break out your most charming first date conversations and flirtations. And sometimes, like, a novelty like this can just add a little bit of spark and ingenuity to your relationship. Alrighty, so the next game that they recommend is to make up stories. It's kind of like the first one, where you just you pretend you're a stranger and then you make up a story about that person. But now they're saying to do it to the other passengers or to do it to people outside of your car. So the other people driving on the road, or if you pass by houses and you see an interesting house, or let's say you see an interesting car, you can make up the person like who has that car. So they said to get really creative and to do it together. It's a bonding experience versus the first one was kind of like, I'm going to be a person and make up all the stuff and you make up all the questions. But this time around, you guys are both asking the questions and then both coming up with a conclusion. So I think this is fun. It is kind of just like people watching. And remember the days before phones? I don't know, you might be a younger listener and have no idea what I'm talking about, but people watching can be really fun. So I say give it a try, if your phone's dead or you just, again, you need time off of your phone, you can just make up stories about other people because they don't know. It won't hurt them. You don't have to post anything about it. It'll be great. So another classic road trip game that they put a spin on is Would You Rather. So when you're a couple, it's a little bit different because you already know about each other. So Would You Rather works a lot better than Never Have I Ever. Although, if you're a fairly new couple and you decide to go on a road trip together, Never Have I Ever is a good place to start. But yeah, for Would You Rather questions for couples, the website says try picking outrageous questions, gross questions, and steamy questions. About your relationship, or what you would be interested in doing surrounding your relationship. The options are really endless, especially with someone you're so intimate with. They're just kind of saying make it fun, make it flirty, and they actually have a couple questions that they recommend, like specifics. So I will read those out because I actually think they're kind of fun and I think they're kind of different. So here we go. One of their questions is, would you rather eat barbecue chips or sea salt and cracked pepper? Definitely barbecue, because cracked pepper on just like a plain small chip is so powerful. It's so intense. I have a friend that really loves salt and pepper, and every time she'd have one, she'd just want me to try it. She's like, please, maybe I'll like it this time. Oh, I just can't. So let us know what you would eat. Again, our Instagram is GSMC_relationship. Let us know if you like salt and pepper, like cracked, freshly cracked on a chip, because that's way too intense for me. And I need to see if I'm in the minority or not. All right. So the second question is, would you rather lose the ability to lie or believe everything you're told? Number 3, would you rather only vacation by the beach or in the city? Number 4, would you rather have 3 kids and no money, or no kids but unlimited money? And number 5, would you rather have a morally questionable job and make tons of money, or help people in your job and make very little money? So there's more questions than that. I think they do have 20, but I just wanted to share some of those with you guys because I've heard would you rather questions and they're usually like salty or sweet. If you're like on an island, would you rather have directions to a raft or like a sailboat you had to fix up? Like something, traditional and kind of boring. But these are really telling about what you would do in kind of real life circumstances. Hopefully you have tons of money and you help people. But yeah, I thought those were quite interesting. Okay, another game that it says you can play would be adult Mad Libs. And honestly, who doesn't like Mad Libs? If you haven't played Mad Libs before, I'd recommend getting a booklet. They're super cheap. They're available anywhere online or in bookstores if those are available to you. And they're really fun for something super cheap. You just fill in different adjectives, nouns, and adverbs into a storyline, and then it makes it into something completely different. It makes a story into something really funny, really raunchy, or, somewhere in between. But yeah, they recommend this one because obviously it can get really fun with someone you're intimate with, because there really are less boundaries when you do it with your partner. Okay, so that's it for what specifically you can do during the road trip. After our break, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about how to minimize fights on a road trip for couples, the different things you can do to try and negate any sort of conflicts that might arise. And then after that, we're also going to talk about how to use it to actually bond together, which is good information to have because you might have a list of ideas of stuff to do to keep you distracted, and you might have a plan of how it might go, but now we're going to actually talk about like how to use it to bond. And then at the end of the episode, remember, I'm going to share my favorite podcast with you guys that will either enhance the intimacy between you two or can help diffuse whatever actually happened during that trip. So I hope you guys stick around, and I'll see you after the break.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hey guys, thanks for coming back for our second segment. Just a little recap. Our first segment, we discussed what to actually do on a long road trip, or, short, depending on how you view it, but a longer road trip with your significant other. And in this segment, we're going to talk about how to plan ahead so maybe you don't fight as much, and then how to actually use the road trip to bond with your partner. I found that really interesting. I'm always looking for new ways to bond with my partner because stress and because life. So we need to keep it fresh, need to keep it new, and because this is a new situation together, being together all the time, it's hard to kind of do that. So yeah, let's get into it. Like I said, this segment is going to be surrounded with ideas for how to avoid the fights in the first place. So again, it is from the same website, and I think I'm falling in love with the website because Happily Ever Adventures recommends the first thing in order to avoid fights is bring snacks and make sure you ask what your significant other likes to eat. You probably already have an idea, I'm sure, but if there's any specific things that they actually like to snack on. Snacks at home and snacks for road trips are, to me, two completely different things. Like, if you ask me what I like to snack on at home, I'm probably going to say veggies and hummus because I can refrigerate the hummus, and I actually really like it. It's not just a healthy thing for me. I genuinely enjoy it, different kinds, especially the spicy ones. And quick side note, I think you guys are just learning a lot about me, and that's what this podcast is doing for myself as well. But I digress. So what I eat on a road trip is significantly different. So I'm going to eat corn chips. I'm going to eat pork rinds. I'm going to eat sunflower seeds, anything with lots of fat or lots of salt. That's what you're going to find me having during this road trip. So that's a lot different than what I would eat at home. So I would need my partner to kind of ask me like, hey, what do you want to eat? Beef jerky is definitely on the list. So you see where I'm going with this. So I think it's important actually to avoid any sort of like, hey, why didn't you get me anything? Or that's not what I want to eat right now. Then you just kind of ask and you guys make a list and then you get whatever snacks you want. Okay, so the second thing in the list they recommend to minimize any sort of fights is to also minimize the FOMO on your couple's trip. So they say one thing that always leads to fighting for this particular couple, like the writer who wrote this article, is feeling, fear of missing out when they're on the trip. And she always wants to see everything, and she feels stressed when they're going to miss out on things, which makes her irritated and a bit grumpy. And to be honest, I'm the same way. There's certain things that I get excited for on road trips, snacks being one of them, obviously. And if it doesn't go the way that I thought it would go, like my expectations aren't met, then I really get upset. I try not to. I try and like say it'll be okay. It's not a big deal, but we all kind of know how that it lowers the capacity to do that when you're in a high stress situation. And I think being alone with one person, no matter who it is, for hours on end, when you're out of music and podcasts and audiobooks to listen to, it can really get on your nerves. So she's saying what works for her to kind of get out of that feeling of FOMO is to figure out the top things that she absolutely has to do on the trip to make it feel like a success. So let's say that you're in California and you're passing certain like landmarks. You're going to want to make sure that you pick at least one of those landmarks that you just have to see. I would say only one. She doesn't actually specify that, but I would just say one, especially if your road trip isn't that long. Compromise is a really good idea in this scenario. So I really like that idea, and then narrowing it down to just one thing you really want to see and then asking your partner the one thing that they want to do helps you set the standard for how the trip's going to go. And then she says she has to accept that no matter what, they're not going to be able to see and do everything that they want to do. So that circles back to number one, just create expectations that are actually manageable during the trip. Okay, so another thing on her list is that she has to remind herself that if they really love it, they can always plan a return trip. So the stuff that you're not going to see, just plan another trip for it. You may have the time now to be able to do that, and if you don't have any time now is a good time to plan ahead for what you might want to see when you have more time or when it's more manageable for you to do so. Another tip and trick is to remember that if you are having like FOMO, fear of missing out, you're not really being present, right? So you want to be as present as you can be with your partner because they're in the car too, and let's say they're the ones driving. Like, how fun is it for you to drive for like 3 hours on end? By hour 3, it gets really tiring. So you want to make sure that if you are thinking about all the stuff that you're missing on this road trip, that your partner is missing stuff too. You're not alone, and that's what coupledom is, right? You are not alone. They probably have the same feelings as you do, so just relax and try and be as present as you can. And yeah, she just finishes it up by saying that, she tries to enjoy the moment and she's focused on it, and just let go of the stuff you don't have time to see and do. Alrighty, so the next thing on the list for what to plan ahead for, to avoid any fights, is to have an idea of where you want to go, but don't plan too much. She said one of her favorite parts of a couple's road trip is being able to be a little spontaneous. It adds excitement and adventure to the trip, which adds excitement to the relationship. And the best way to be spontaneous during a couple's road trip is don't overplan it. You kind of know overall what your itinerary will look like, but keep your options open to new ideas, especially if your partner's super excited about something. And let's say that you were messing around with the idea of going somewhere else. Just let them have it. Just go with the flow, as much as possible. I will say this happened with me and my partner the last time we went on a road trip. We went to Vegas, and on the way home we stopped by the Alien Jerky spot. And I don't know if you know about this because you could be in a completely different area than we are, but it's pretty popular. It's the normal stop that you go to or from Vegas, but I had never been before, and my boyfriend loves that place. He likes the jerky. We both like spicy foods, and this is a fun side note. If you guys have ever seen the YouTube show Hot Ones, it's from the First We Feast channel, and it's hosted by Sean Evans. But anyways, they have the hot sauce at this particular jerky spot. It's called The Bomb. And that's the one that has made itself known on various seasons of that show. And it's usually the hot sauce that trips people up. So they have it available there. And we almost bought it, but we didn't because we were like, okay, how much are we actually going to use this sauce? But we ended up buying different sauces and different beef jerkies, but I would have never have realized that they had that sauce available there had it not stopped. And it's kind of like full circle for us because that's a show we love to watch at home. So it created a really memorable experience. And if you're open to new opportunities, that's going to allow you to do that, right? So I really like that recommendation. The next one is to set a budget. And I think this one is like the most important by far, because you guys don't want to complain about spending money when you're out trying to have fun. That's just another stressor, and we all know that finances are just a big deal to everybody, especially right now. So make your budget as realistic as possible and just do a little research before you go. Like everything else, just look at food, fuel, admissions, like hotels, wherever you're going to go. Just be prepared like you typically would, especially like having respect for your partner. If you guys like don't live together and you're not really clear on what your financial situation is of your partner, then you want to make sure that it's reasonable for everybody. Okay. The next one is to consider switching off driving responsibilities. I'm not really sure why that's on the list. I would hope you're considerate enough of your partner to switch off driving. It does make a difference if you don't have a license. I mean, in that case, you don't really have that option. But if you do, you should be switching off with the driver. They could get tired. That could be dangerous. So to me, that's kind of common sense. But let's say that you don't have a driver's license. Consider what your partner might need in order to drive for as long as you guys need to drive. And I think that's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to move on. Okay. So the last thing on the list for how to be prepared before your road trip so that you can kind of minimize your fights is be prepared. Like I said, you just need to be prepared. You want to make sure that you have proper car insurance. It's not expired. You want to make sure the car's maintenance is up to date for like tires and oil change. If you rent a car, make sure that you have everything ready to go. What's required to rent that car, you are of age, you have a proper driver's license, and whatever contract you're going to sign, you have the proper paperwork to do that. So also make a packing list before leaving. Like I said, your favorite snacks, what you're going to listen to, different games you can play, and then make sure that you plan ahead and have enough time when you are going on your trip to make sure you have everything with you, like a toothbrush or contact solution, because damn, I've forgotten that so many times in my life. It's really not fair and it sucks. So make sure you guys give yourself enough time to actually be ready to go. Okay, so let's say that you're done with your planning and you already have all the activities you want to do. But here are activities that will help couples bond on the road trip. And again, I just found this really interesting, so I want to share it with you guys. So the first thing that Happily Ever Adventures recommends is to set an intention for a couple's road trip. Now, this is a little different than setting up your expectations, because your expectations are your own and you can control those. But if you set an intention with your partner for how the trip is going to go, like maybe detail a plan that you have in mind, the one place that you really want to go, how many road stops you're going to go to, and or the hotels you might go to, really run this by your partner. Don't expect them to come to you, just take charge and do it. And that's a recommendation I've gotten in therapy before. There's this whole idea, and I won't get into it now, but I might get into it in a different podcast. But essentially it just says, like, think about the things you would like your partner to do and then just do them yourself. Now, there's arguments to be made on both sides about why that can and cannot work, but for this situation, I mean, it's very cut and dry, right? You're just going to come up with ideas, plans that you have for the road trip, go over them with your partner, and hopefully that's a fun experience. You guys can come up with different games that you do like, different snacks, again, that you do like, and then you can talk about at the end of the trip, like whether or not you felt that you accomplished your intention. And it's a good thing to think about during rocky moments of the trip. Like, okay, reset my intention. What do we actually want to do on this trip besides just have fun? We want to enjoy each other, and we want to do things that the other person wants to do, because it helps us learn and grow and just compromise and bond with our partner. So I really liked the idea of setting an intention, because intentions are really important, because then you understand yourself and then you understand your partner. Alrighty, so the next idea on the list is to reframe mishaps as an adventure on your couple's road trip. So this is also an example of something you can do outside of just, having a road trip, is that if something happens that you weren't expecting or was outside of the plan and it upset you, just, turn it. Make it something that's like interesting or fun, or like I always tend to say, oh man, it's just a comedy of errors. And just by saying that phrase alone kind of helps me reframe what's actually happening. Because again, if you guys set that intention that, you know, we're going to have a good time and this is how we're going to have a good time, and something happens like a bump in the road that doesn't allow that to happen, go back to the intention. Remember what was supposed to happen on this trip, and you reframe how the fight occurred. Now, if it's a really bad one, obviously that's hard to do, but I mean, it's a road trip. So what you're gonna get angry about is like, I don't want to stop again. We just stopped like an hour and a half ago, and then you get mad because you really have to go to the bathroom. But just say like, hey, I know we didn't intend for this to happen, but I really need to go, or I'm going to go right in front of you. And usually that ends the fight. So I like that idea because it just takes you back to your intention, and it helps you reframe any sort of little fights that can come up. And, you know, speaking of rest stops, it's kind of funny because it does bring that up as the last thing, you know, to help you guys bond is to actually stop at rest stops. They're saying that you never know what you might find. Nowadays, this is a little different, and I totally understand that. But with all COVID security and health practices in place, this could still be an exciting thing, because let's say you stop at a rest stop and it's in a really beautiful area that you hadn't seen before, or it's in a really not good area that you've seen before. Again, let's be safe, but maybe it's just something you didn't know about that city. Like it smells like cows, or it has a lot of farming area that you weren't aware of before, or that is something you could see as well, just like farm animals, depending on the area you're in, or lots of desert, or apparently you guys know that I live in those kinds of areas, but you get what I'm saying. You can just see and explore and do new things depending on a rest stop. Like if you haven't been there before, then maybe something new will pop up. And that is a bonding experience, because any new experience is going to make you guys bond. So I like that idea as well. Okay, so that's it for our second segment, and I can't believe how fast this is going for me. I hope it's going just as enjoyably fast for you guys as well. Our next segment, we're going to actually talk about intimacy. And how does that connect with what we're talking about now? Well, we just talked about how to bond with your partner, and I think it's really important to remember what intimacy even looks like, so that when you're on this road trip, or even if you're just at home and you're trying to reclaim some of the intimacy between your partner, it's important to remember what it is and why you want it. And then I'm also going to give you a test on how to find it, which I think is super, super cool. And remember, at the very end of the episode, I'm going to give you the specific relationship podcast, obviously besides this one, that will keep you guys either growing in your intimacy, or maybe just make you laugh after whatever goes down during that road trip, or whatever fights you may have. So make sure you stick around after the break, and we'll talk a little bit about intimacy.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the third segment of the GSMC Relationship Podcast. In our last couple of segments, we talked about what to do during a road trip so you guys keep busy and you don't annoy each other. Then we talked about how to maybe plan to avoid the fights and also how to bond during the trip. But now we're going to talk about what intimacy actually looks like so that you remember during the trip, okay, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Or even if you're just trying to accomplish staying sane, it's important to remember what intimacy actually looks like so that it's like subconsciously down below, like why you're trying to have a good time, because it kind of sets your intentions for the rest of the trip. So that's why I want to talk about it. And don't forget, at the very end of the episode, I'm going to give you other relationship podcasts to listen to that'll either increase that intimacy you're looking for, if you're looking for it, or something just to laugh at with your partner. It's somehow revolving around relationships, so stick around for that. But for now, let's get started on intimacy and remembering what it means so that when we're on this road trip, we kind of have that in mind. According to Psychology Today, yes, unfortunately, we're no longer with the Happily Ever Adventures website. But according to Psychology Today, there are 7 elements that define an intimate relationship. And I liked this article versus like the top 10 on how to recreate intimacy because this is actually defining like what makes your relationship intimate. And by remembering what makes it intimate, you're going to be more likely to do those acts. So here are the 7 components of intimate relationships that help define intimacy. First one is knowledge. And it says when you're forming deep, intimate relationships, you want to share a vast amount of personal information that you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable sharing with others. And remember, that's what makes your partner important. So this information that you share with each other, those questions that you might ask during the road trip, you know, the ones like 20 questions or never have I ever, you want to make sure that you don't use that information against them because this is the reason why they're telling you it in the first place. They love you, they trust you, and you want to make sure you respect that and you remember that. So when you're having an altercation, when you're, if a fight happens, just remember that they gave you this knowledge on the idea that you would respect it and you would honor having that knowledge. So remember to feel valued as a person, as their partner, that this is shared information that they don't typically give out to anybody. And I think that would really help during a fight because you're going to be like, okay, remember what it means to be intimate is that they're sharing this information with me because I'm going to respect it and I'm going to respect them. So don't use it against them in a fight. And that's what I found really actually helpful. So the next item that is listed as a component that defines intimacy is interdependence. Now, this is not to be confused with codependency. That's a completely different issue and one we might talk about in the future, but this one's interdependence, and they define that as relationships tend to be highly interdependent, wherein each partner influences the other meaningfully, frequently, and vastly in terms of topic and importance. So they're saying this can range from choosing what to eat for dinner or where to live. So this can even be like choosing where to go on your road trip, right? Or where you go during your road trip. So you guys are your own people, you come up with your own ideas, and like I mentioned earlier, respect your partner's ideas. So let's say that you had 3 top places you wanted to go to, and you're actually on your road trip, and you have to choose between your choice or their choice. And remember, choose one that is very highly important to you. Then ask your partner, is this very important to you? Like, if you had to choose between this and something else on our list, which one would you choose? Just have that conversation with them, and it shows that you're paying attention to their needs and their wants, and you're also remembering, like, you're not going to compromise your idea just because they want to do theirs. You are having a conversation and a dialogue about what they want the most. And so if they decide that this is without a doubt something I can't skip, and let's say, for instance, you decide the same, just have the conversation. And if you have to skip out on what you're doing, plan it for the next trip. Or if they have to skip out on what they want to do, plan it for the trip home. There's always a compromise there, and I think that's really important to remember, is that you don't have to diminish your needs in order to celebrate theirs. So what you want to do is just have a conversation, and that's who you have those types of conversations with, is your intimate relationships. I mean, that includes friendships, and we are talking about relationships here, and I think with relationships, you can even just be real with them and be like, hey, is this actually where you want to go? You can be straightforward and then just move on and say, all right, we'll plan the next one for me. I think that's very easy to do, so I really like that advice. Just remember your needs, remember that they have needs, and then try and meet somewhere in the middle. Okay, so the third thing they list as a sign of intimacy is care. So care is a hallmark of healthy, intimate relationships. And I like the word healthy in there because while all relationships could be intimate, not all of them are healthy and intimate. And they're saying care is a hallmark of a healthy relationship because it differs from the type of care that you would typically display to another non-intimate person, right? Care is more than kindness, and it's more than being nice. You actually help comfort in times of distress, and you keep them from harm. So let's say your partner's been driving for 2 hours, and you feel lively, you feel relaxed, you feel like you have the energy, offer to drive. It's as simple as that. It really does go back to the examples I brought up earlier, but the examples I brought up earlier for how to avoid fights work because you're with an intimate partner who you care about, and in a healthy relationship, that's not going to be a sacrifice. That's not going to be, you're not going to hold a grudge against them and be like, of course I have to drive because they're tired by now and it's only been an hour. It's like, remember what you're building this relationship on. Remember that you like this person and that you show such a deep care for them that you're willing to, do something that helps them out, or you display affection for them. Like maybe put your hand on their lap or hold their hand while they're driving. They're on cruise control and they don't actually need that other hand. You can do small signs like that show appreciation, small little gestures that kind of keep them going and remind them that you care. Okay, so the next one that it lists as a sign of intimacy is trust. And trust is pretty difficult to discuss because it's a difficult concept. It's very complex. It requires multiple parts to it. But you feel it even without being fully able to define it, right? So let's bring up again the road trip. You trust your partner to drive, and hopefully you trust them to navigate. So even if you are not driving and you are helping your partner navigate, that trust that they know what they're doing helps you from freaking out if something goes wrong. So if you remember that you trust them enough to handle the car for you, let's say that they make a wrong turn, or let's say that they missed a turn. You come at them with kindness and love and care, and you say hey buddy, you missed that last turn. You could have a little humor about it. And if it keeps happening, then again, because you trust that they know what they're doing and you care about them, you say, hey, do you want me to take a turn at driving and notice that, we're kind of missing a few stops and I don't mind driving at all. I have plenty of energy. Or if you don't, then make sure that you make a plan to pull over and do what you need to do until you are ready to go back on the road. So I think trust is really important because I think we forget. When you're nervous and you're in a car and you're stressed out for whatever reason, then you can kind of snap at each other. But remembering that you care, again, and remembering that you trust this person with your life will help you kind of calm down in those kinds of situations. Alrighty, so the next one is responsiveness. And it says, this means recognizing, understanding, and supporting each other in both times of pain and gain. So when you feel like your needs are being met, this culminates in a feeling of being appreciated and loved. And, we said at the top of the episode, identify what your expectations are, talk about what your intentions are with your partner, and this includes your needs. So if you feel like these needs that, whatever your intentions were, are not being met during the trip, tell your partner, say, hey, we set this up before we came. This is not the direction we're going. Let's reroute. Let's remember, how we want this trip to go and try and go from there. Now, these last two, I feel like, we kind of understand already. So I will kind of lump them in together. But number 6 is mutuality. This one just explains when you go from a me to a we. So let's say at the beginning of a relationship, you might say like, this guy and I are going out of town this weekend, but now it changes to that point, like, we're going out of town this weekend. And I really like this point because it reminds you that you're a we now. So during the trip, you're going to have your needs, like I said, and your intentions. And so if they're not being met, you want to make sure that they are. But you're also remembering, like, this is both of your guys' trips. And I know I said earlier you want to keep your partner in mind, but don't only keep your partner in mind because they have their own needs. Just remember that you're in this together. You're going together. This is our trip, whether or not, like, I'm going for a wedding and my partner's coming with me because he's my partner and he's going to be with me at the wedding. But this is an experience that we'll share together. So this is no longer an experience that's just mine. It's not like he's coming with me. It's like we're going together. This is something we are doing, including the road trip, including the wedding. So really keep that in mind that you're in it together and anything that happens you deal with together. So I like that reminder. And then the last one is just commitment. So it says within healthy, intimate relationships, there's mutual volition for wanting the relationship to continue indefinitely. So that allows the other 6 components that I mentioned before to really grow, obviously, because you have the time, that you allow the time to do that. So I really like this as the landing point for how we end and remembering intimacy, because you are in a commitment and it's saying that you're allowing that to grow. And so remember that when any fights can occur, or let's say you're bored and you're like, oh, I can't stand this person anymore. Like, this is going to happen. You're going to have good times. You're going to have bad times. You're going to let it blow over. You're going to stand your ground. This is just stuff that happens, and it's going to happen in a committed relationship no matter who you're with. So if something's really getting to you, just remember, we're a we now. I'm intimate with this person. I have knowledge about this person. It's grown for a long time, and I want it to continue to grow in a very positive and healthy way. The way I'm going to do that is remembering that I'm committed, and this person, you know, I care about them, and I want to stay committed. And that'll really help ease the tension whenever you're thinking about, damn, I can't stand this person. Well, maybe you can because you've done it for a while already. Okay, and to wrap up this segment, I'm going to take us way back in time to 2015. I'm sure you guys have heard of this article before. It's the New York Times article for Modern Love. Like I mentioned earlier, I'd be mentioning this now. But it's titled, "To Fall in Love with Anyone, Do This." And it's related to the discussion about intimacy because basically it talks about a psychologist who runs a study where 2 strangers fall in love, and they do that by forcing intimacy, and they force intimacy with these 36 questions, and then they maintain eye contact at the end for 4 minutes. So I thought this would be a good idea because when you're on the road, what else are you going to do? And I did give you ways to bond during the road trip, and I gave you guys definitions on remembering what intimacy is. But now these are the questions that are going to really force you guys out of your comfort zone and to recreate that intimacy. Now, honestly, I don't know how fair it is to do during a road trip, but I did this during a road trip. And even though we couldn't maintain eye contact while we asked the questions, it made them easier to answer and maybe took the pressure off of us. So that was nice. And we already have that kind of deep established intimacy, at least in our relationship. But I thought this might be fun because you can ask these questions to pretty much anyone if you want to get to know them better. It doesn't necessarily have to be a couples thing. But if it is a couple, just get ready because these questions are pretty intense. So yeah, this was all sparked from a New York Times article for Modern Love, like I mentioned earlier. And it's kind of crazy what these questions are and how they actually work. The psychologist that did this study, Arthur Aaron, he succeeded in making 2 strangers fall in love. I mean, they got married 6 months after. So they even worked for the woman who wrote the article. Her name is Mandy Lynn Catrone. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I'm probably getting that wrong. And she wrote the article To Fall in Love with Anyone, Do This, and she actually ended up falling in love with the person she just spontaneously did this quiz with. So apparently it works, and let's kind of go through them and see if you would want to answer these with your partner. And I'm just realizing now, I might answer some of these on the air. So I'm creating an intimacy with you guys, and if you want to reach out, you can reach out with any of your answers to these questions on our Instagram, and it's GSMC_relationship. Or if you don't want to get that intimate, you can just let us know if you even played the game with your partner or just your closest friend. I'm really interested to see who else plays this game. Okay, so let's get started with the actual questions. And I am only going to do one question because I don't want to go through a whole list of questions if they're not advice. So, but let's just pick an interesting question and go from there. Okay, let's choose lucky number 7 and or the most magical number. Question number 7 is, do you have a secret hunch about how you will die? Woof, what a question. I've actually never thought about how I'm going to die before. I've always been extremely paranoid, being in the house alone. And that's all I'll say about that because I currently am alone and I no longer want to think about that question. So thanks a lot. But anyways, it asks questions like that, like really diverse, interesting, if you could wake up tomorrow having gained one quality or ability, what would it be? Or asking, if a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, what would you want to know? I think those are really probing and really intimate questions. They get even deeper than that the further you go along the list. So be careful who you're asking these questions to because you might not want to know the answer or it's just a little bit too soon. So make sure you actually are open to getting to know these people, whoever you ask this question to. Okay, cool. So that was the end of segment 3 and kind of a wrap up on the things you can do during a road trip, how to create more intimacy, and how to actually bond during the trip. Now, like I mentioned throughout the entire episode, this is the end. This is the fun part. Our next segment after the break is going to be all the relationship podcasts, other than this one, of course, that will either help deepen the intimacy between you and your partner, or it's just going to give you a good laugh, but it's still about relationships. So make sure you stay tuned, and I'll see you after the break.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hey guys, and welcome to the last segment of our episode. So just to quickly recap, our episode was about, how to handle a road trip with a partner that you maybe have been living with nonstop for the last couple of months, like literally nonstop. You can't go outside right now, so it's kind of complicated. But yeah, how to survive that road trip and remembering what intimacy even means so that if a fight does happen, we go back to basics. And now we're just going to talk about the fun stuff. We're going to talk about the podcasts that you guys could potentially listen to. Some are going to increase the intimacy, and then some are just going to be for fun. Some you can just let loose and listen to people talk about relationships, all the fun parts of the relationship. So let's get started. The first episode I want to recommend is called Friendshipping, and it's with Trin and Jen. Trin with one N and Jen with two. And I'm not kidding. I have been through their backlog of episodes. They started in 2015, I think. I've been through the backlog of Friendshipping like 3 different times because their episodes aren't too long. There are some that are about an hour, but most of them are less than an hour. And even though it's called Friendshipping, it is about how to be the best type of friend you can. And that includes your partner. That includes remembering like you like this person as a friend as well. That is why you got with them. I mean, you like him more than a friend, but you started out liking him just like you would like anybody. And learning and remembering how to be kind and the difference between kindness and being nice. And did I mention that these ladies worked for Cards Against Humanity? Well, one of them still does, and the other one now works for a Kickstarter for a different company, but they are hilarious. They literally work for a company that make humor for a living. They make jokes for a living. So while they give constructive advice for how to be a good friend, they're just so funny along the way. They each have their own personality and their own stuff going on in their own lives, and they're not quiet about it, but they're also really funny about it. I never thought I would find snails interesting, but if you want to know more about that, check out Friendshipping. It's friend shipping together, one word with an exclamation point at the end, and it has like a blue logo. You'll find it. It's pretty easy. And I do want to mention, because the podcast started so long ago, they've been on a personal journey themselves, and they haven't been afraid to open up, like I mentioned before. And so, they are LGBTQ friendly, like they do mention that all the time. They make sure they have the proper pronouns. They even request that if you write into them about your relationship issues, that you say what your pronouns are. So they are definitely the podcast that I would recommend the most because they are on top of their stuff. So yeah, check out Friendshipping. It's really worth even just trying it for, I don't know, a couple minutes just to see if you like it. Okay, the next one is freaking hilarious. I love this podcast. It is hosted by 4 people who identify as queer, and they are a self-described multiracial mix of queer writers who talk about sex, relationships, identity, and everything else. They talk about entertainment. They talk about scientific research. I believe one of them is a scientist. So they just talk about everything under the sun, including relationships. And I just think they're really hilarious. Again, I like those podcasts that the hosts aren't afraid to talk about their personal lives and they add a little bit of humor, but they also add a lot of truth. And they always back up what they want to say with like science and research. So I really like that podcast too. All right, let's get a little real. Some of these podcasts that I'm going to mention now are more intimate. They kind of dive deep into relationships. So if you're looking to explore your relationship and ask those types of questions with your partner while you're on a road trip or even while you're at home, here are some podcasts that you guys could listen to. So one is called Marriage Therapy Radio. And I like this one because it has actual marriage therapists on it. One of the hosts is Zach Brittle and the other host is Laura Heck. And according to them, they tackle complaints every marriage experiences and the science behind solutions to those complaints. And you might recognize them from their Vanity Fair video where they dissect couples from movies, and the movies range from Disney to Oscar-winning films, so I think that's really interesting. It kind of circles back to my very first episode where I say, hey, use fiction to kind of figure out what your needs are. That's exactly what they do, and it's kind of funny because I ended up doing that. But the reason why I like this podcast is because it's very short. It's not time consuming at all. They basically take one listener question and they dissect it and why it would work or different practices that work and that don't work. And that's it. They just get to the point. And because they are therapists, I tend to trust them. Of course, do your research, but they are real therapists who still practice with clients. So, that's why I really like this podcast. Okay, so the next one is called Sex Gets Real with Dawn Sarah. Her tagline is no fluff, no lies, just sex. And while this isn't the sex podcast, I do want to recommend it because sex happens in relationships. And having listened to her podcast, she talks more than just sex. I mean, it's obviously the focus of her podcast, but she talks about different types and styles of relationships and how sex factors into those types of relationships. And it's given me some insight into how different people are when they interact sexually and what their preferences are and what their concerns are, because she gets listener questions too. And so people really approach her with individualized concerns, and it really helps you feel less alone, because even if they're not a concern of mine, it makes me realize, wow, everyone's really different. We have really different needs, whether it's sexually or in our relationship, and we need to learn that we need to be comfortable with what our needs are, regardless of the spectrum of vanilla to extremely not vanilla. So it helps you feel less alone, it helps you feel more connected, and these are really interesting people, really interesting stories about what they do sexually. So I really like the podcast, and if that's something you're into, I would definitely give it a listen. Okay, I'm going to circle back just a little bit. I want to go back to some of the fun podcasts because I want to break it up a little bit and get some humor back in here. So, my favorite podcast of all time is The Read. And yeah, that's it. That's the name of it. It's The Read. And if you don't know what reading someone is, you should. You can Google it. But basically, bloggers and now TV stars Kid Fury and King Crystal cover everything, and they're throwing shade and spilling tea. And I really don't want to explain that to you guys. I hope I'm not being rude, but yeah, just do your research. The Read, man. It's two comedians who talk about celebrities, everything in Black culture, but they also talk about relationships. At the very end of the episode, they have listener letters, and I kid you not, these are the funniest things I have ever heard in my life, because again, they're just funny. They're just telling people what they need to hear. They're reading people all over the place, and their tagline has somewhat become break up with them, because they've gotten so many listener letters over the years about all these women with all these trash men writing in, what do I do? What do I do? And then by like halfway through the listener letter, Kid Fury's already saying, break up with them. Break up with them. Break up with him. Like he just says it because he already knows where this listener letter is going. Now I do have to say they do listen, they do take the time and they listen, but they've been around for a while, so they kind of know already where a listener letter is going if it gets to that point. But yeah, they're freaking hilarious. I highly recommend it. Again, it's The Read if you don't know. It's super popular to the point where they got their own TV show. I mean, now with COVID, they can't do it, but yeah, check them out. The Read, available everywhere. Okay, so the next one I'm going to recommend is The Friend Zone, and they basically are like The Read. They're just as amazing. They tell it like it is. Let me give you a little rundown. The Friend Zone is hosted by Dustin Ross, Hey Friend Hey, otherwise known as Fran, and Asante, and they explore mental health, mental wealth, and mental hygiene, because who in the hell wants a musty brain? And Dustin, I am so sorry that I had to say that. He says it way better in the episode, but these three friends talk about healthy friendships, healthy relationships, and healthy sex. Like they said, they're like in it for mental hygiene, health, and wealth, and they really do that. They give you practical steps, practical advice for how to achieve that regardless of the relationship. But let me tell you, they do talk about relationships almost every episode, and they talk about how to care for yourself and then how to make sure you have a healthy relationship from like a real, not a professional experience, but from their own relationship experience, which they have had, and I have learned to grow and trust them and to just be like Fran. Just be like Fran, and that's all I need to say. So yeah, make sure you check out The Friend Zone. It's hilarious. I love it. Alright, so the last two podcasts I'll mention are a little bit more serious, but they're with professionals, and I highly recommend you listen to them, regardless of whether or not you listen to them on the road trip. Just listen to them by yourself, maybe pick a few favorites or like little snippets, and then you can share those with your partner. But the first one I want to mention is called Unlocking Us, And this is a new one, so there's not a lot of episodes, but it's hosted by Brene Brown, who you might have heard of. She's pretty huge. She has her PhD in research, and she's a licensed master social worker, and she focuses on emotions and experiences that bring meaning and purpose to our lives. I think you may know her from her TED Talks. She's given more than one. They have a lot of hits, and they focus on vulnerability, or there's one on listening to shame. But yeah, her podcast, Unlocking Us, it's really about human connections and the magic and messiness of what it means to be human. And that includes romantic relationships. So she just really focuses on the science behind what we do. And it's in a really practical way. I mean, she has given so many TED Talks over the years. And if you've ever listened to a TED Talk, they're really relatable. They talk in a language that you're going to understand. They tell stories, and they do it in a really succinct amount of time. And that's exactly how she runs her podcast. They haven't lasted longer than about 30 minutes, I believe. And one of her recent guests was Judd Apatow, or Apatow. I'm not sure how to say that, but he's the guy that brought us Knocked Up, 40-Year-Old Virgin. Why am I forgetting all these things? The King of Staten Island is his newest movie, but if you look up basically anything with Seth Rogen in it, it's hilarious. These movies are just about real life moments, even though they're extreme, right? They're brought to the extreme, like getting a girl knocked up and then what to do moving forward. That's a real moment, but he brings humor to it. And so Brene interviews him, and she asks how humor helps us deal with grief and stress, and because that's kind of her focus. So it's a really interesting interview. And again, her podcast is called Unlocking Us, and I really hope you check it out. Alrighty. So the last podcast I'll recommend is called Where Should We Begin? And it's with therapist Esther Perel. Sorry, Esther. And she counsels real couples. You hear the interviews she does with them. You hear the reason why they're even at her therapy office wanting help. So it's actually really interesting. It reminds me of all the other podcasts where people write in with their real life experiences, what's happening, except you hear it as it's happening. So they record the entire therapy session, and then Esther takes it step by step, and she breaks down like, okay, not telling them advice, but it's like therapy in real time where she's asking and probing and getting the questions out. And again, it's just giving you that experience of realizing like how many people struggle with the same thing. And if it's not the same thing that you're struggling with, to know that people are struggling, and that Esther will point out like, this is common, or, you know, this is a common way to get out of this situation. So it's full of great advice, and it's really kind of strange to hear people in real time having therapy, but it's also semi-therapeutic for you because you're going through it with them. So I really like that one. Highly recommend it for couples. So you feel like you're not alone, and it helps you reconnect in that way because you ask yourselves maybe the questions that the couple had asked themselves. So I highly recommend that one. And that's it for my recommendations on relationship podcasts. There are so many more I listen to, but basically I wanted to give you guys some good ones that would help with intimacy, and some ones that'll just help you laugh and break out of like the stressful situations that you could possibly be in, regardless of whether or not you're taking a road trip. But these are the ones that I love, and I want to hear about the ones that you guys love. So again, reach out to us. Any of our social media is going to be GSMC_relationship. And we want to hear what podcast you listen to, because this is all community, right? So of course you're listening to ours, and we love that you are. Ooh, and by the way, now that I mention it, please make sure that you guys like subscribe and also write a review. That really helps. Oh, and when you share it too on Facebook and Twitter, you know, I kind of look forward to that on my social media nowadays. Really looking forward to people's recommendations of other things that can help distract me from the world at large. So yeah, please write in. Tell us your recommendations for snacks, because I love them, and also recommendations for the podcast or other recommendations for TV shows or anything. Again, it's GSMC_relationship. And if you guys could please write us a review or subscribe to the podcast, we would love to see you around and have a conversation. So Thank you again for listening to the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We hope to see you around next time, but until then, we'll catch you on the internet. Thanks for tuning in. Bye!
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.